The Chimes by Charles Dickens. Second quarter. The letter Toby had received from Alderman Cute was addressed to a great man in the great district of the town. The greatest district of the town. It must have been the greatest district of the town, because it was commonly called the world by its inhabitants. The year was old, that day. The patient year had lived through the reproaches and misuses of its slanderers, and faithfully performed its work. Spring, summer, autumn, winter. It had labored through the destined round, and now laid down its weary head to die. Trotty had no portion, to his thinking, in the new year or the old. Put 'em down. Put 'em down. Facts and figures, facts and figures. Good old times, good old times. Put 'em down, put 'em down. His trot went to that measure, and would fit itself to nothing else. But, even that one, melancholy as it was, brought him, in due time, to the end of his journey. To the mansion of Sir Joseph Bowley, Member of Parliament. The door was opened by a porter. Such a porter. Not of Toby's order. Quite another thing. His place was the ticket, though, not Toby's. This porter underwent some hard panting before he could speak, having breathed himself by coming incautiously out of his chair, without first taking time to think about it and compose his mind. When he had found his voice, which it took him some time to do, for it was a long way off and hidden under a load of meat, he said in a fat whisper, "Who's it from?" Toby told him. "You're to take it in yourself," said the porter, pointing to a room at the end of a long passage, opening from the hall. "Everything goes straight in, on this day of the year. You're not a bit too soon, for the carriage is at the door now, and they have only come to town for a couple of hours, a purpose." Toby wiped his feet, which were quite dry already, with great care, and took the way pointed out to him, observing as he went that it was an awfully grand house, but hushed and covered up, as if the family were in the country. Knocking at the room door, he was told to enter from within, and doing so found himself in a spacious library, where, at a table strewn with files and papers, were a stately lady in a bonnet, and a not very stately gentleman in black, who wrote from her dictation, while another, and an older, and a much statelier gentleman, whose hat and cane were on the table, walked up and down, with one hand in his breast, and looked complacently from time to time at his own picture, a full length, a very full length, hanging over the fireplace. "What is this?" said the last-named gentleman. "Mr. Fish, will you have the goodness to attend?" Mr. Fish begged pardon, and taking the letter from Toby, handed it, with great respect. "From Alderman Cute, Sir Joseph, is this all? Have you nothing else, porter?" inquired Sir Joseph. Toby replied in the negative. "You have no bill or demand upon me. My name is Bowley, Sir Joseph Bowley, of any kind from anybody, have you?" said Sir Joseph. "If you have, present it. There is a cheque-book by the side of Mr. Fish. I allow nothing to be carried into the new year. Every description of account is settled in this house at the close of the old one. So that if death was to cut," suggested Mr. Fish. "To sever, sir," returned Sir Joseph, with great asperity, "the cord of existence, my affairs would be found, I hope, in a state of preparation." "My dear Sir Joseph," said the lady, who was greatly younger than the gentleman. "How shocking, my Lady Bowley," returned Sir Joseph, floundering now and then, as in the great depth of his observations. "At this season of the year we should think of ourselves. We should look into our accounts. We should feel that every return of so eventful a period in human transactions involves matter of deep moment between a man and his banker." Sir Joseph delivered these words as if he felt the full morality of what he was saying, and desired that even Trotty should have an opportunity of being improved by such discourse. Possibly he had this end before him in still forbearing to break the seal of the letter, and in telling Trotty to wait where he was a minute. "I am the poor man's friend," observed Sir Joseph, glancing at the poor man present. "As such I may be taunted. As such I have been taunted. But I ask no other title, bless him for a noble gentleman," thought Trotty. "I don't agree with Cute here, for instance," said Sir Joseph, holding out the letter. "I don't agree with the filer party. I don't agree with any party. My friend, the poor man, has no business with anything of that sort, and nothing of that sort has any business with him. My friend, the poor man, in my district, is my business. No man or body of men has any right to interfere between my friend and me. That is the ground I take. I assume a paternal character toward my friend. I say, my good fellow, I will treat you paternally." With that great sentiment, he opened the alderman's letter, and read it. "Very polite and attentive, I am sure," exclaimed Sir Joseph. "My lady, the alderman is so obliging as to remind me that he has had the distinguished honour, he is very good, of meeting me at the house of our mutual friend Deedles, the banker, and he does me the favour to inquire whether it will be agreeable to me to have Will Fern put down. He came up to London, it seems, to look for employment, trying to better himself, that's his story, and being found at night asleep in a shed, was taken into custody, and carried next morning before the alderman. The alderman observes, very properly, that he is determined to put this sort of thing down, and that if it will be agreeable to me to have Will Fern put down, he will be happy to begin with him, let him be made an example of, by all means, returned the lady. Last winter, when I introduced pinking and eyelet holing among the men and boys in the village as a nice evening employment, and had the lines, "Oh, let us love our occupations, bless the squire and his relations, live upon our daily rations, and always know our proper stations," set to music on the new system, for them to sing the while, this very Fern, I see him now, touched that hat of his, and said, "I humbly ask your pardon, my lady, but an't I something different from a great girl? I expected it, of course, who can expect anything but insolence and ingratitude from that class of people? That is not to the purpose, however. Sir Joseph, make an example of him." Trotty, who had long ago relapsed, and was very low-spirited, stepped forward with a rueful face to take the letter Sir Joseph held out to him. "You have heard, perhaps," said Sir Joseph, oracularly, "certain remarks into which I have been led respecting the solemn period of time at which we have arrived, and the duty imposed upon us of settling our affairs, and being prepared. Now, my friend, can you lay your hand upon your heart, and say that you also have made preparation for a new year? I am afraid, sir," stammered Trotty, looking meekly at him, "that I am a little behindhand with the world." "Behindhand with the world," repeated Sir Joseph Bowley, in a tone of terrible distinctness. "I am afraid, sir," faltered Trotty, "that there's a matter of 10 or 12 shillings owing to Mrs. Chickenstalker." "To Mrs. Chickenstalker," repeated Sir Joseph, in the same tone as before. "A shop, sir," exclaimed Toby, in the general line. "Also a little money on account of rent." "A very little, sir. It oughtn't to be owing, I know, but we have been hard put to it." Indeed, Sir Joseph looked at his lady, and at Mr. Fish, and at Trotty, one after another, twice all round. He then made a despondent gesture with both hands at once, as if he gave the thing up altogether. How a man, even among this improvident and impracticable race, an old man, a man grown grey, can look a new year in the face with his affairs in this condition, how he can lie down on his bed at night, and get up again in the morning, and, there, he said, turning his back on Trotty, "Take the letter. Take the letter, I heartily wish it was otherwise, sir," said Trotty, anxious to excuse himself. "We have been tried very hard," Sir Joseph still repeating, take the letter," and Mr. Fish not only saying the same thing, but giving additional force to the request by motioning the bearer to the door. He had nothing for it but to make his bow and leave the house. And in the street, poor Trotty pulled his worn old hat down on his head to hide the grief he felt at getting no hold on the new year, anywhere. He didn't even lift his hat to look up at the bell tower when he came to the old church on his return. He halted there a moment, from habit, and knew that it was growing dark and that the steeple rose above him indistinct and faint in the murky air. He knew, too, that the chimes would ring immediately, and that they sounded to his fancy, at such a time, like voices in the clouds. But he only made the more haste to deliver the alderman's letter and get out of the way before they began, for he dreaded to hear them tagging friends and fathers, to the burden they had rung out last. Toby discharged himself of his commission, therefore, with all possible speed and set off trotting homeward. But what with his pace, which was at best an awkward one in the street, and what with his hat, which didn't improve it, he trotted against somebody in less than no time and was sent staggering out into the road. "I beg your pardon, I'm sure," said Trotty, pulling up his hat in great confusion, and between the hat and the torn lining, fixing his head into a kind of beehive. "I hope I haven't hurt you." As to hurting anybody, Toby was not such an absolute Samson, but that he was much more likely to be hurt himself, and indeed he had flown out into the road like a shuttlecock. He had such an opinion of his own strength, however, that he was in real concern for the other party, and said again, "I hope I haven't hurt you." The man against whom he had run, a sun-browned, sinewy, country-looking man, with grizzled hair and a rough chin, stared at him for a moment, as if he suspected him to be in jest. But, satisfied of his good faith, he answered, "No, friend. You have not hurt me, nor the child, I hope," said Trotty. "Nor the child," returned the man. "I thank you kindly." As he said so, he glanced at a little girl he carried in his arms, asleep, and shading her face with the long end of the poor handkerchief he wore about his throat, went slowly on. The tone in which he said, "I thank you kindly," penetrated Trotty's heart. He was so jaded and footsore, and so soiled with travel, and looked about him so forlorn and strange, that it was a comfort to him to be able to thank anyone, no matter for how little. Toby stood gazing after him as he plodded wearily away, with the child's arm clinging round his neck. At the figure in the worn shoes, now the very shade and ghost of shoes, rough leather leggings, common frock and broad slouched hat, Trotty stood gazing, blind to the whole street. And at the child's arm, clinging round its neck. Before he merged into the darkness the traveller stopped, and looking round and seeing Trotty standing there yet, seemed undecided whether to return or go on. After doing first the one and then the other, he came back, and Trotty went halfway to meet him. "You can tell me, perhaps," said the man with a faint smile, "and if you can I am sure will, and I'd rather ask you than another, where Alderman Cute lives." "Close at hand," replied Toby. "I'll show you his house with pleasure. I was to have gone to him elsewhere tomorrow," said the man, accompanying Toby, "but I am uneasy under suspicion, and want to clear myself and to be free to go and seek my bread, I don't know where. So, maybe he'll forgive my going to his house tonight." "It's impossible," cried Toby with a start. "That your name's Fern, eh?" cried the other, turning on him in astonishment. "Fern? Will Fern," said Trotty. "That's my name," replied the other. "Why, then," cried Trotty, seizing him by the arm and looking cautiously round, "for heaven's sake don't go to him. Don't go to him. He'll put you down as sure as ever you were born. Here, come up this alley, and I'll tell you what I mean. Don't go to him." His new acquaintance looked as if he thought him mad, but he bore him company, nevertheless. When they were shrouded from observation, Trotty told him what he knew, and what character he had received, and all about it. The subject of his history listened to it with a calmness that surprised him. He did not contradict or interrupt it once. He nodded his head now and then, more in corroboration of an old and worn-out story, it appeared, than in refutation of it, and once or twice threw back his hat, and passed his freckled hand over a brow, where every furrow he had ploughed seemed to have set its image in little. But he did no more. "It's true enough in the main," he said, "master, I could sift grain from the husk here and there, but let it be as 'tis. What odds? I have gone against his plans, to my misfortune. I can't help it, I should do the like tomorrow. As to character, them gentlefolks will search, and pry, and have it as free from spot or speck in us, afore they'll help us to a dry good word. Well, I hope they don't lose good opinion as easy as we do, or their lives is strict indeed, and hardly worth the keeping. For myself, master, I never took with that hand, holding it before him, what wasn't my own, and never held it back from work, however hard, or poorly paid. Whoever can deny it, let him chop it off. But when work won't maintain me like a human creature, when my living is so bad, that I am hungry, out of doors and in, when I see a whole working life begin that way, go on that way, and end that way, without a chance or change, then I say to the gentlefolks, keep away from me. Let my cottage be. My doors is dark enough without your darkening of 'em more. Don't look for me to come up into the park to help the show when there's a birthday, or a fine speech-making, or what not. Act your plays and games without me, and be welcome to 'em and enjoy 'em. We've now to do with one another. I'm best let alone." Seeing that the child in his arms had opened her eyes, and was looking about in wonder, he checked himself to say a word or two of foolish prattle in her ear, and stand her on the ground beside him. Then slowly winding one of her long tresses round and round his rough forefinger like a ring, while she hung about his dusty leg, he said to Trotty, "I'm not a cross-grained man by nature, I believe, and easy satisfied, I'm sure. I bear no ill will against none of 'em. I only want to live like one of the Almighty's creatures. I can't, I don't, and so there's a pit dug between me, and them that can and do. There's others like me. You might tell 'em off by hundreds and by thousands, sooner than by ones." Trotty knew that he spoke the truth in this, and shook his head to signify as much. "I've got a bad name this way," said Fern, "and I'm not likely, I'm afeard, to get a better. 'Tan't lawful to be out of sorts, and I am out of sorts, though God knows, I'd sooner bear a cheerful spirit if I could. Well, I don't know as this alderman could hurt me much by sending me to jail, but without a friend to speak a word for me, he might do it, and you see," pointing downward with his finger, at the child. He sunk his voice so low, and gazed upon her with an air so stern and strange, that Toby, to divert the current of his thoughts, inquired if his wife were living. "I never had one," he returned, shaking his head. "She's my brother's child, a orphan. 9-year-old, though you'd hardly think it, but she's tired and worn out now. They'd have taken care on her in the Union, 28 mile away from where we live, between 4 walls, as they took care of my old father when he couldn't work no more, though he didn't trouble 'em long, but I took her instead, and she's lived with me ever since. Her mother had a friend once, in London here. We are trying to find her, and to find work too, but it's a large place." "Never mind. More room for us to walk about in, Lily." Meeting the child's eyes with a smile which melted Toby more than tears, he shook him by the hand. "I don't so much as know your name," he said, "but I've opened my heart free to you, for I'm thankful to you, with good reason." "I'll take your advice and keep clear of this, Justice," suggested Toby. "Ah," he said, "if that's the name they give him. This Justice. And tomorrow we'll try whether there's better fortune to be met with somewheres near London. Good night. A Happy New Year, Stay," cried Trotty, catching at his hand, as he relaxed his grip. "Stay. The New Year never can be happy to me, if we part like this. The New Year can never be happy to me, if I see the child and you go wandering away, you don't know where, without a shelter for your heads. Come home with me. I'm a poor man, living in a poor place, but I can give you lodging for one night and never miss it. Come home with me. Here. I'll take her," cried Trotty, lifting up the child. "A pretty one. I'd carry 20 times her weight, and never know I'd got it. Tell me if I go too quick for you. I'm very fast. I always was." Trotty said this, taking about 6 of his trotting paces to one stride of his fatigued companion, and with his thin legs quivering again, beneath the load he bore. "Down the mews here, Uncle will, and step at the black door, with T. Vec, ticket porter, wrote upon a board, and here we are, and here we go, and here we are indeed, my precious Meg, surprising you," with which words Trotty, in a breathless state, set the child down before his daughter in the middle of the floor. The little visitor looked once at Meg, and doubting nothing in that face, but trusting everything she saw there, ran into her arms. "Here we are, and here we go," cried Trotty, running round the room and choking audibly. "Here, Uncle Will, here's a fire you know. Why don't you come to the fire? Oh, here we are and here we go. Meg, my precious darling, where's the kettle? Here it is and here it goes, and it'll boil in no time." Trotty really had picked up the kettle somewhere or other in the course of his wild career, and now put it on the fire, while Meg, seating the child in a warm corner, knelt down on the ground before her, and pulled off her shoes, and dried her wet feet on a cloth. And she laughed at Trotty too, so pleasantly, so cheerfully, that Trotty could have blessed her where she kneeled, for he had seen that, when they entered, she was sitting by the fire in tears. "Why, father," said Meg, "you're crazy tonight, I think. I don't know what the bells would say to that." Meg looked toward him and saw that he had elaborately stationed himself behind the chair of their male visitor, where with many mysterious gestures he was holding up the 6 pence he had earned. "I see, my dear," said Trotty, "as I was coming in, half an ounce of tea lying somewhere on the stairs, and I'm pretty sure there was a bit of bacon too. As I don't remember where it was exactly, I'll go myself and try to find 'em." With this inscrutable artifice, Toby withdrew to purchase the viands he had spoken of, for ready money, at Mrs. Chickenstalker's, and presently came back, pretending that he had not been able to find them, at first in the dark. "But here they are at last," said Trotty, setting out the tea things, "all correct. I was pretty sure it was tea and a rasher. So it is. Meg, my pet, if you'll just make the tea, while your unworthy father toasts the bacon, we shall be ready immediate." "It's a curious circumstance," said Trotty, proceeding in his cookery, with the assistance of the toasting fork, "curious, but well known to my friends, that I never care, myself, for rashers, nor for tea. I like to see other people enjoy 'em," said Trotty, speaking very loud to impress the fact upon his guest, "but to me, as food, they are disagreeable." Yet Trotty sniffed the savour of the hissing bacon, as if he liked it, and when he poured the boiling water in the teapot, looked lovingly down into the depths of that snug cauldron, and suffering the fragrant steam to curl about his nose, and wreathe his head and face in a thick cloud. However, for all this, he neither ate nor drank, except at the very beginning, a mere morsel for form's sake, which he appeared to eat with infinite relish, but declared was perfectly uninteresting to him. "Now, I'll tell you what," said Trotty after tea. "The little one, she sleeps with Meg, I know, with good Meg," cried the child, caressing her. "With Meg, that's right," said Trotty. "And I shouldn't wonder if she'll kiss Meg's father, won't she?" "I'm Meg's father." Mightily delighted Trotty was, when the child went timidly toward him, and having kissed him, fell back upon Meg again. Meg looked toward their guest, who leaned upon her chair, and with his face turned from her, fondled the child's head, half hidden in her lap. "To be sure," said Toby. "To be sure. I don't know what I am rambling on about, tonight. My wits are wool gathering, I think. Will Fern, you come along with me. You're tired to death, and broken down for want of rest. You come along with me." The hand released from the child's hair, had fallen, trembling, into Trotty's hand. Sir Trotty, talking without intermission, led him out as tenderly and easily as if he had been a child himself. Returning before Meg, he listened for an instant at the door of her little chamber, an adjoining room. The child was murmuring a simple prayer before lying down to sleep, and when she had remembered Meg's name, dearly, dearly, so her words ran, Trotty heard her stop and ask for his. It was some short time before the foolish little old fellow could compose himself to mend the fire, and draw his chair to the warm hearth. But when he had done so, and had trimmed the light, he took his newspaper from his pocket and began to read. Carelessly at first, and skimming up and down the columns, but with an earnest and a sad attention, very soon. For this same dreaded paper redirected Trotty's thoughts into the channel they had taken all that day, and which the day's events had so marked out and shaped. His interest in the two wanderers had set him on another course of thinking, and a happier one, for the time, but being alone again, and reading of the crimes and violences of the people, he relapsed into his former train. "It's too true, all I've heard today," Toby muttered, "too just, too full of proof. We're bad." The chimes took up the words so suddenly, burst out so loud, and clear, and sonorous, that the bells seemed to strike him in his chair. "And what was that?" they said. Toby Veck, waiting for you Toby. Toby Veck, waiting for you Toby. Come and see us, drag him to us, haunt and hunt him, break his slumbers. Toby Veck, door open wide Toby, Toby Veck, door open wide Toby, then fiercely back to their impetuous strain again, and ringing in the very bricks and plaster on the walls. Toby listened. Fancy, his remorse for having run away from them that afternoon. No, nothing of the kind. Again, and yet a dozen times again. Haunt and hunt him, drag him to us, deafening the whole town. "Meg," said Trotty, softly, tapping at her door. "Do you hear anything?" "I hear the bells, father." "Surely they're very loud tonight." "Is she asleep?" said Toby, making an excuse for peeping in. "So peacefully and happily. I can't leave her yet though, father." "Look how she holds my hand, Meg," whispered Trotty. Listen to the bells. She listened, with her face toward him all the time. But it underwent no change. She didn't understand them. Trotty withdrew, resumed his seat by the fire, and once more listened by himself. He remained here a little time. It was impossible to bear it, their energy was dreadful. "If the tower door is really open," said Toby, hastily laying aside his apron, but never thinking of his hat, "what's to hinder me from going up in the steeple and satisfying myself? If it's shut, I don't want any other satisfaction. That's enough." He was pretty certain as he slipped out quietly into the street that he should find it shut and locked, for he knew the door well, and had so rarely seen it open, that he couldn't reckon above 3 times in all. It was a low-arched portal outside the church, in a dark nook behind a column, and had such great iron hinges, and such a monstrous lock, that there was more hinge and lock than door. But what was his astonishment when, coming bareheaded to the church, and putting his hand into this dark nook, with a certain misgiving that it might be unexpectedly seized, and a shivering propensity to draw it back again, he found that the door, which opened outward, actually stood ajar. He thought, on the first surprise, of going back, or of getting a light, or a companion, but his courage aided him immediately, and he determined to ascend alone. "What have I to fear?" said Trotty. "It's a church. Besides, the ringers may be there, and have forgotten to shut the door." So he went in, feeling his way as he went, like a blind man, for it was very dark. And very quiet, for the chimes were silent. The dust from the street had blown into the recess, and lying there, heaped up, made it so soft and velvet-like to the foot, that there was something startling even in that. The narrow stair was so close to the door, too, that he stumbled at the very first, and shutting the door upon himself by striking it with his foot, and causing it to rebound back heavily, he couldn't open it again. This was another reason, however, for going on. Trotty groped his way, and went on. Up, and round, and up, higher up. Until, ascending through the floor, and pausing with his head just raised above its beams, he came among the bells. It was barely possible to make out their great shapes in the gloom, but there they were. Shadowy, and dark, and dumb. A heavy sense of dread and loneliness fell instantly upon him, as he climbed into this airy nest of stone and metal. His head went round and round. He listened, and then raised a wild halloa, was mournfully protracted by the echoes. Giddy, confused, and out of breath, and frightened, Toby looked about him vacantly, and sunk down in a swoon.